my goal here is to focus on things you can do before you retire that make the transition period easier. You may have seen a previous video I did called 5 Things to Do Before You Retire. Now, if you haven't seen it yet and you want to catch up on that either first or after this video, I'll put a link in the description. And when I did that video, I asked my viewers to drop their ideas for things you need to do before you retire into the comments. And I got some really good suggestions. I'm going to share them with you here. And so without further ado, here are the 4 other things that you should do before you retire. Now, 2 of them are money related. It's hard to think about retirement without thinking about being ready financially. So, 2 of them are money related and 2 of them aren't. Let's take the 2 that aren't money related first. In my last video, one of my suggestions was to shore up your work friendships before you retire. And what I explained there was that if there are some people that you work with that you really enjoy and who you feel have become really good friends, make sure you put time and energy into connecting with them outside of work and shoring up that relationship before you leave. Now, the reality is, too, that oftentimes those friendships are based on work activities. And you may feel very close and you may feel, if you've gone through some hard things together, there's really a bond there. But when you're not spending all that time together every day, sort of in a forced function, those relationships can easily just slip away, especially if you're retired and they're not, and your worlds are just very different. So, the flip side to that piece of advice that I gave you is to make sure that you also pay attention to the relationships that you have outside of work. If you spend a lot of time working and those are your friendships, are your work related friendships, maybe really think about forming some relationships outside of work before you retire so that when you do retire, you have those to hang on to and fall back on. And you may already have friends outside of work, which is great. But if you've been so focused on your job and your career that you just don't have that many friends outside of work, it's a good time before you retire to start getting involved in various activities, to start reaching out to people. Maybe it's rekindling old friendships from high school or college or whatever it is. Or maybe it's making friendships, joining a mountain biking group or a kayaking group or whatever it is that your where your interests lie, and make friendships around those extracurricular activities. Because when you retire, you'll be spending more time doing those extracurriculars. And if you already have established friendships, it will make that transition just a little bit easier. Now, of course, you can make those kinds of friendships outside, after you retire as well. But my goal here is to focus on things you can do before you retire that make the transition period easier. So that was number 1. The second thing has to do with your living situation. In particular, maybe your husband or your wife or your partner, and thinking about how it is that you're going to spend so much time together now that you've retired. Now, some people will have one spouse or one partner retire before the other. That's a whole separate question because no matter how good your relationship is and no matter how well intentioned everybody is, I can imagine now, this wasn't my situation, but I can imagine that if one person retired before the other, that the person who is still working could start over time to really build up some resentment when they're seeing their partner get to enjoy life and go off on all these great adventures or spend their time doing whatever or sleeping in or whatever it is. There can be some resentment that's built up there. I can absolutely see that happening. And you may not intend for that, but it would be pretty natural to have a little bit of resentment. So, having that conversation ahead of time and how you're going to navigate through that and how you're going to communicate if that's coming up would be a great idea. And the second part to that then is If you and your spouse are going to be retired together, which is what my situation was, my husband and I both retired at the same time, all of a sudden, you might have like the best marriage ever or the best relationship ever. But when you spend 24/7 together, week after week after week, that can be challenging, right? You can really start getting on each other's nerves in ways that you never even dreamed of before. Things that used to be little irritations can become big irritations because that's most of your world is being with that person. My advice, and something that my husband and I really focused on, was making sure that we both had some kind of activity to do separate from each other. We did some things together. We would discuss books a little bit after, we read them and had, those conversations, and we'd go out to eat together, and we did a lot of things together. But I in particular, being an introvert, but I in particular really needed time to myself. And I'm also a people pleaser. So asking for that time became really difficult for me. And we really needed to have conversations about how are we going to coexist with each other in a small space, because we significantly downsized in a small space for days and days and days on end. We eventually figured out a rhythm of existence and picking up on cues from each other when we needed some time apart. And that doesn't mean that anybody in particular is at fault, but it's not rocket science to imagine that that could be challenging. So, having those conversations ahead of time on how you're going to navigate that, what each other's needs might be, what are ways that you can make sure you have some time apart. Sometimes it's just, hey, I'm going to the grocery store and I'm going alone. Or sometimes it means I'm getting on an airplane to go visit my friend for a few days. It could take any number of ways to solve that particular challenge. But definitely think about that, because we've been married for 30 plus years. 30, gosh, it'll be 35 this year. And as much as we know each other and we can coexist really well and overcome all kinds of issues, being inseparable day in, day out can pose challenges. The next two things you can do before you retire have to do with finances. And the first one, I'm sure, isn't going to be rocket science to a lot of people either, but making sure that you pay down your credit cards. Now, there's a lot of debate in the comment sections from a lot of my videos, especially, that paying off your mortgage is the most important thing to do, that it's super important. Now, I understand why that feels important. And I know that there are a lot of financial advisors and retirement experts who tell you to do that. They say that you have to do. I actually would argue with that. For some people, that's exactly the right thing to do. And let me back up a little bit. I am not a financial advisor. I am not an expert in any way. I have my experience and my observed experience from the people around me. So if you have financial questions, I'm not the person. Find a financial advisor or somebody you can trust to run your ideas through. But paying off your mortgage is not necessarily a slam dunk. Now, I'm actually thinking I may do a whole separate video on that, because that's an issue. But let's put that aside. It's not about the mortgage. But the thing I think is really important, and I can't imagine, there are very few scenarios where you wouldn't do this, but making sure that you pay your credit card debt off completely before you retire. You want to go into retirement with as little baggage as possible. And having a big mortgage is enough baggage, right? But having car payments or credit card payments or anything that's a month to month payment, credit card debt is really expensive. If you're not paying that debt down every month to zero, you're paying a lot in interest. And as you retire, that is precious money every month. So get those credit cards paid down as much as possible. And this kind of dovetails into the last point. And the last suggestion that my brilliant viewers had in the comments was to sort of do a trial run for living on a retirement budget before you retire. So sit down, make yourself a budget for what you think you're going to be able to live on during retirement. Income, savings, whatever that is, whatever the streams of cash that you have, and practice for, I mean, at least 6 months, but preferably a year. Practice living below your means while you're still making money before you have to, so you can understand what that feels like. Number one, you'll save money and be able to start paying down all those credit cards. So it's kind of a twofer here. But also really experience what that's like, and is that a lifestyle that you're going to be able to live. Now this is a little tricky because you might have commute costs that you won't have when you're retired. You might have to buy clothes if you have to wear a certain type of clothing to work. There are expenses you're going to have while you're still working that you won't have when you're retired. But you get my drift, right? Try to live as much like as if you were retired beforehand, so that you can really try it on and see if you've accurately figured out how you are going to be able to live happily. So try it out for a while and see if, number one, you can actually live on the budget that you think you set for yourself in retirement, but also it gives you time to make some adjustments. Either, gosh, maybe I need a little bit more to retire than I thought, or maybe you think, oh gosh, I can totally do this. And, maybe that speeds up your timeline of retirement. Who knows? I don't know. I just think it's a really good idea to practice it a little bit and to really get a sense for how that feels before you make the big decision to pull the plug on your career. I hope that's helpful. Again, if you have more ideas, please put them in the comments. We are really learning from each other here on Life After Work. And I'm just really excited to be able to learn from my viewers and also then to be able to share that back out with you. So, thank you so much to all of my viewers who made additional comments to give me these ideas on different things to share with you. As you can see, there's really valuable conversations that happen here, and I'd love for you to be included in that. So if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button so that you can get notified of future videos. And if you got some value out of this video, please hit the like button as well. Come back and join me again for more about life after work.